Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Daintree, exploring the world's oldest rainforest, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Matt Cornish. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Matt, take it away.
Thank you very much, Rob, and g'day everyone. Welcome to my webinar about the Daintree, the world's oldest rainforest. You might notice on this home screen it says the wet tropics, not the Daintree. I'm going to dive into that very shortly on why. In fact, the Daintree is just a small portion of an extended wet tropics World Heritage Area. And the ultimate Australia trip explores the wet tropics World Heritage Area. So for this webinar, I'm going to go into the Daintree, but just a little bit further beyond and give you an insight into what we experience in the field and a little bit about the stories behind this incredible ecosystem. As Rob already mentioned, my video will not be on today. I'm actually in a car in far north Queensland. I live in a rainforest myself, and I thought that's why it would be such a poignant webinar to do. Is the fact that I had to leave the rainforest because I don't have any internet at home, and I come into my small town of two streets, but it's still very pitch black and dark here. It's early in the morning in Australia. A little bit about myself. I live in far north Queensland in the rainforest, as I mentioned. I'm a Natural Habitat Adventures expedition leader for Australia, also a photo guide. I'm a naturalist, nature photographer, but I've been working in the wildlife industry now for roughly 19 to 20 years. I've been working as a zookeeper, a wildlife educator, photographer, tour guide, and expedition leader. So why am I doing a webinar? I keep trying to call it a podcast. Why am I calling it? Why am I doing a webinar on a rainforest? Well, yesterday was World Rainforest Day, and I've got a lot of mixed opinions about these days that we celebrate. A lot of people generally think about, talking about the rainforest for one day of the year, when realistically it's the lungs of our Earth. It's such a precious and important ecosystem that we have throughout the world, and a lot of rainforests worldwide are being destroyed. In fact, statistically speaking, we are missing now 50% of the world's rainforests through clearing and destruction. 50% of our rainforests in the world have been destroyed. But we're not going to be focusing on the devastation and the impact of these kind of things. We're going to focus on some good news today. So, the Daintree, the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, is actually getting bigger, which is fantastic. It's a rainforest that's expanding. Whereas we hear about these stories of rainforests in Asia and South America that are being destroyed at an increasing rate. Well, our rainforest in Australia, thankfully, is actually growing, and we're going to go into that topic very shortly. So I call this the nuts and bolts. What is a rainforest and what makes it worth celebrating? Well, we have to look at the definition of what a rainforest is. So there's a few different criteria. Must have heavy rainfall, over 100 inches annually. That's a lot of rain. In fact, where I live, I'll give this everyone this little bit of an indicator. We had a heavy downpour about a year and a half ago, where I had 7 foot of rain in 4 days. So that gives you a bit of an indication. That was certainly above normal. It was torrential, but certainly it gives you a bit of an indication to the amount of rainfall that we do get in these regions. Dense vegetation with a closed canopy, majority obviously evergreen vegetation. Not all vegetation is evergreen in all rainforests, just the majority. And there must be multiple layers of vegetation. So the undergrowth, which are the small plants that are taking up that low level. And then obviously we've got the canopy, but rainforests have to have an emergent layer. This is when trees push through the canopy and then pop up above the canopy, just like an umbrella. So the emergent layer. And another layer of the rainforest is, of course, the ground, the forest floor, which is rich in diversity, rich in nutrients and life. Approximately 6% of the world's surface is rainforest, so it's pretty low. But when you think about it, it has 50% of all animal species live in rainforests. So 50% of all living animals worldwide live in rainforests. But it's only 6% of the world's surface, which is, for me, it's astonishing. But it truly shows you the impact that if we clear and destroy these areas, we have the possibility of losing so much more. So the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, well, what is it? So on the left-hand side, I've got a map here. This is the state of Queensland, which is the northeastern part of Australia. And you might recognise some of these towns, particularly if you are going to be undertaking the Ultimate Australia trip. There's one little town there called Cairns, and I live very close to there. But this green patch here is the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. So obviously located in what we call far north Queensland, and it's approximately 2.2 million acres of rainforest, but it's only 0.12% of the Australian landmass, so a very, very small amount. We do have different rainforests throughout Australia. This is what we call a tropical rainforest. It includes the famous Daintree National Park, but also the not often heard of Atherton Tablelands. Now, on the Ultimate Australia Tour, we actually experienced both of these locations, the Atherton Tablelands and the Daintree National Park. I live in the Atherton Tablelands, and the wildlife numbers up here are phenomenal. Significant number of endemic plants and animals, and this area was actually declared a World Heritage Site in 1988. Now, I'm going to dive into that story very shortly, but it was following constant and committed public pressure. There was a battle between people and power. I like this image. Just looks like a stream and some green vegetation, but this is actually teeming with life. In the rainforest, this is taken in the Daintree rainforest, just walked past a bridge and took a picture on my mobile phone. But we can have over about 2,000 different species of plant in one particular national park in the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. It is phenomenal. And some are modern adaptations and some are primitive plants. So, how do we get a World Heritage Site? Well, it goes back in time a long way. Now, I must say, tens of thousands of years Indigenous Australians have lived not only in Australia, but the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area in far north Queensland. The Eastern Kuku-Yalanji people lived in the Daintree and were caretakers for the land, and they had a really deep connection and understanding with the rainforest, its plants, its animals, and that connection. Unfortunately, we have lost a lot of it, and we're trying to make sure we rebuild that in the modern world. In 1770, Captain James Cook and Sir Joseph Banks, well, they travelled past the wet tropics on board the Endeavour. This was really the first recorded European interaction with this area. It's an interesting story, actually. There's a little illustration on the right-hand side of the Endeavour. But in 1770, James Cook and Banks on board the Endeavour actually travelled up the east coast of Australia. Many explorers from different countries from around the world had already come in contact with the Australian landmass on the west coast, but it wasn't really overly appealing. Very dry, desert, barren. Didn't really look like there was too much worth living there for. Now, when Banks and Cook travelled up the east coast, they saw a lot more lush green vegetation, a lot more fertile land. And when they went past far north Queensland, in fact, just off the coast of the Daintree, their boat crashed into a coral reef system. Now, that reef system is now named the Endeavour Reef after that boat. But when they were stuck there, so Captain James Cook said to the crew that it's fine, guys. When the tide comes up, our boat will lift off the reef and we'll continue our journey north. The tide came up and the tide went back down and the boat was still stuck there. So there was a little bit of confusion, a little bit of panic. Cook actually ordered the crew to start throwing things overboard. Cannons and anchor. In fact, I believe there was actually food supplies thrown over, so they must have been desperate. The next tide cycle, the boat lifted off the reef and they were free. Now, the problem wasn't over. There was actually a huge hole in the boat. One of the crew actually took off the mainsail of the boat, rolled it up and put honey on it, threw it over the front of the boat, dragged underneath the hull, and the suction of the hole sucked up the sail and plugged the hole. Now, that term is called fothering, but they've actually saved the boat and they continued their journey north. This happened just off the coast of a place called Cape Tribulation. In fact, Cook named it Cape Tribulation. He said it was a place of many trials and tribulations. And eventually, he continued his journey up to the next river where he could land a boat and go about repairing it. And that is in a place called Cooktown, which is the northern part of the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. So Joseph Banks actually kept a journal of this journey and in great detail. And he managed to collect plant and animal specimens from his trip. And really, this was the building blocks of our understanding of the Australian ecosystem. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, all the way up to the mid to late 1800s, Europeans were realizing that far north Queensland had gold. So they had moved into Australia, they'd start building up settlements, and they realized far north Queensland, there was a lot of gold. In fact, in some areas west of the wet tropics, people were walking along and kicking nuggets of gold. There was that much of it. So establishments were made, towns were built, the agricultural community started really developing, and there was an explorer and assisted the government in mapping out the countryside. His name was George Dalrymple. And as he arrived in the Daintree, he saw this magnificent rainforest, and he decided to name it after a very accomplished government geologist. His name is Richard Daintree. So some people think the Daintree is actually a tree. Well, it's just a pure coincidence because Daintree is actually the last name of Richard Daintree. Now, the Daintree was partially cleared and utilised for the agricultural industry, but also livestock and forestry. When they were exploring the Daintree, they realised there was actually a tree called the red cedar. Now, this, they also called it red gold, was one of the most highly sought after timbers. So logging started to take place. While they were logging, they were building agriculture, clearing the landscape, and causing a lot of damage to the Daintree rainforest and the wet tropic surrounds. Now, if we continue to fast forward all the way through the 1900s, growth and agricultural development continued. Houses are being built in the rainforest, roads are being cleared, farms are being developed. And there's a lot of research being done into this rainforest, and scientists were starting to understand that this rainforest was unique. Some of the plants that were being located in the Daintree rainforest alluded to the fact that this may be one of the most primitive and ancient ecosystems on Earth. Now, all the way up into the 1980s, there was a lot of clearing, but the community, this is, post World War II, hippie era, all the way up to the 80s now, the community that was living in the rainforest were trying to protect it. And the government, they proposed more roads and more development. There's a very famous situation occurred. We call it the Daintree blockade. The government actually said, right, we've got roads that lead into the Daintree, but we would like to have another major road that goes through the Daintree and all the way up to Cooktown, which is the next town north. And this would have included mass clearing of the rainforest. The government ordered this to happen. The machines rocked up, and as they arrived, they were met with one of the most famous protests in Australia's history, the Daintree blockade. As you can see by the illustrations on the left-hand side here, the image in the middle down the bottom, it shows a man's head. It's been described that this was the scene that most machine operators were met with, human heads. The protesters buried themselves underground and left only their heads above. They chained themselves to trees, chained themselves to road, and they said, you cannot clear this area. It is vitally important for our understanding of the earth as we know it. The government kept all the protesters engaged. They sent more earthworks equipment around the rainforest to the northern part and eventually cleared the road. So they lost that fight. But that massive media attention that occurred eventually led to the protection of the Daintree rainforest and the allotment of a World Heritage Site. So they didn't win the fight, but they won the war. People over power. So We love wildlife. We love doing wildlife trips. It's time to dive into a little bit about some of the wildlife of the wet tropics. We've got four animals here. I wonder if at home you can identify them or loosely identify them. On the left-hand side, we have the saltwater crocodile, just a small one, a little hatchling. Next one across, we have a Lumholtz tree kangaroo, one of our most elusive animals in far north Queensland. It's actually an endemic to the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, so it's only found here, nowhere else. And then one step over, the yellow blotched rainforest skink, a small little lizard that lives in the cracks and grooves of rainforest trees. And then on the right-hand side, one of our most famous birds in far north Queensland, the southern cassowary. Well, let's dive into some of these animals, shall we? Before we do, Hand, I want to just show you this table. I know colourful pictures are much more exciting, but this it gives you a bit of an understanding of why the wildlife is so important in the wet tropics. It's a place like no other, a place of endemism. So on the left-hand side, we've got mammals, birds, reptiles, frogs, freshwater fish, and then obviously a total number accrued. Total number of wet tropic species. So this is all the different species that live in the wet tropics World Heritage Area. And then number of species which are endemic. Now remember, endemic means they are only found here. So 58 frog species found in the wet tropics, 41% of them are only found here. You look at mammals, 12% of the mammals that are found here are only found here. We have 13 different endemic mammals in the wet tropics. We have 13 different bird species only found here. 27 reptiles only found here. It's absolutely incredible. We have 85 endemic animal species to the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. So certainly a place that's well worthy of protection. This guy, the southern cassowary. For those that come on our Ultimate Australia trip, this is a big target and a very, very hard bird to find. And as you can see, he's doing his best impression at trying to hide right now. I struggle to find him in this image myself. He's a very, very good master of disguise. Now, we have the southern cassowary in northern Australia. A lot of people are a little bit perplexed by that. Well, why is it called the southern cassowary then? Well, there's three species of cassowary, and they're all found in Papua New Guinea, which is just north of Australia. And we only have one, which is the southern cassowary. It's the southern species compared to the other two. It's a keystone species, and if you haven't heard this term before, it is incredibly important. The keystone description came about from, let's call it a stone archway. If you remove the stone that's in the middle up the top, the whole thing crumbles. It is the keystone holding that archway together. So that term is used in ecology and environmental science, and it really describes an animal as having a stronger impact and relevance on the surrounding ecosystem than most other animals. It's the key to the survival of the ecosystem itself. Why is it a keystone species? Well, it's a seed distributor and it's also a seed germinator. Now, the cassowary walks along, eats fruit, and does poops. It's as simple as that. What a life. But what it's doing is it's eating rainforest fruits, eating approximately 200 different species of that. When they eat the fruit, they walk along, they do a poop. That poo is full of seeds, and those seeds will then sprout and turn into trees. Now, a cassowary, to give you a bit of an idea, is about 6 foot tall. It's massive. It's actually been described as the world's most dangerous bird, which is pretty crazy as well. But while walking through the rainforest, generally, they take the path of least resistance. So they're walking through open patches of rainforest where they can. When they're pooing, those seeds are turning into trees in open areas. So they're actually planting trees in areas that need trees, which is really interesting. But also, because they're a germinator, their gut, their digestion process is actually triggering the germination of certain fruits. Some fruits can just be planted straight in the ground and turn into a tree, and some might not. But by going through a cassowary's intestinal system, the enzymes in the stomach break down the outer coating of the seed and increase the chance of these seeds turning into a tree. There was a study many years ago into a plant called the cassowary plum, a fruit that's so big the cassowary is the only one that can eat it whole. So it really relies on the cassowary for dispersal. But also, they say that the percentage increases astronomical when it comes to germination. So it might be roughly a 4% chance of turning into a tree without going through the cassowary. But if you put it through the cassowary and comes out the other side, there's a 96% chance it will turn into a tree. So its gut is actually germinating seeds, which is just mind blowing. Now, they belong to a ratite family, so the evolutionary history dates back to around about 60 million years, and they've got a really, really weird, unique anatomy. So when I say weird, unique anatomy, look at this thing growing off its head. Looks like a big, dirty toenail. Well, this is actually what we call a cask. And for a long time, we had no idea what it's for. It's made of keratin on the outside. So it is fingernails and hair, very similar, keratin. On the inside is cartilage in a honeycomb shaped structure, and it's full of nerve endings. And there's blood flow going through it as well. So it's understood that it's very sensitive. And when the cassowary communicates from one cassowary to another, it's a deep booming sound like a mm. It's understood perhaps the cast, being so sensitive, actually picks up the vibrations of those calls and increases the ability of hearing another cassowary's communication. In 2008, a lot of research was done on the cast, and they actually put thermal imaging cameras on it and realized that the cast was a different temperature to the cassowary's body most of the time. So maybe it's a bit of a cooling system. Maybe it assists the cassowary to thermoregulate, being in a hot part of the world, and being a black colored bird, they might overheat. So the cast is actually cooling the cassowary down, which is incredible. So the anatomy, very, very unusual, and a big target for those that are doing the ultimate Australia trip. Tree kangaroos. Wow. I wish I could see the reaction of all of our viewers and listeners today when I said tree kangaroo. A kangaroo that climbs trees. Unheard of. It's pretty phenomenal, to be honest. There's actually 14 species of tree kangaroo in the world. We only have two, though, that live in Australia, and both of them are only found in the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. Again, endemism. It's incredible. We have the Lumholtz tree kangaroo, which is the one on the left-hand side, and we have the Bennett's tree kangaroo, which is the one on the right-hand side. Now, before I dive into a little bit about these species, I just want to give you the distribution. The Lumholtz tree kangaroo is only found around the Atherton Tablelands area. So probably thinking, what is a tableland? What is Atherton? It's the township of the mountains west of Cairns. So you're probably looking around about 2,200 feet above sea level. Rainforest, a bit of a higher altitude, but not too high. That's where these guys live. The Daintree is the lowland rainforest, so it's right on the water, a completely different habitat. And that's where the Bennett's tree kangaroo lives. To give you a bit of an idea about the Bennett's tree kangaroo, it is probably the most elusive mammal in Australia. It is unbelievably difficult to find. I've lived in far north Queensland for 16 years, been guiding through this area and exploring pretty much non-stop. I've seen this species 3 times. And interestingly enough, one of them was on a NatHab tour. This was before I was an expedition leader. I was actually a local guide in far north Queensland, and I was leading natural habitat adventures tours through the Daintree rainforest. And I had never seen a Bennett's tree kangaroo. I've been trying my whole life. One day when I was walking along, the expedition leader noted that there was water coming from the sky, but there was no clouds. It was actually a Bennett's tree kangaroo urinating. I couldn't believe it. And we actually saw my first Bennett's tree kangaroo on a natural habitat adventures tour. Again, unbelievably rare. Some people who live up there have lived there for 20 years and never seen one. They live right up the top of the canopy and they blend in very, very well. To be able to capture this image, which I did, was unbelievably exciting. But most sightings, if you do see it, if you're that fortunate, it's just a small patch of fur. Now, they evolved from a terrestrial life, not an arboreal life. So, if we have a look at all kangaroos and the evolutionary history in Australia, they actually came from a common ancestor which was similar to a possum. They came down from the trees and evolved on the ground. So they evolved this ability to hop. Their whole insides was designed for a boom and bust environment. So not much food and a lot of food, energy preservation. But for some reason, these two species and many more in Papua New Guinea moved back up into the trees. We know this because they're a bit clunky, to be honest. They're not really designed for life in the tree. The tail is not prehensile, it's just a counterweight. And their feet and hands they're great for climbing, but they're not as good as they could be. They're not as good as, let's say, a possum. Now, unfortunately, these guys are threatened by segregation of habitat, vehicle strikes, and dog attacks, which you will learn about more when you do come to Australia. I'm actually going to probably do a webinar in the future on tree kangaroos and dive into this topic a little bit heavier. So I won't go too much further, but there is a few threats to these guys, and we've got a lot of work to do to protect them. Bowerbirds, if you haven't heard of a bowerbird before, this is a bird that creates a structure as part of a mating ritual. We have 8 bower building bird species in Australia, and this is actually called the golden bowerbird. This is the holy grail of birds in far north Queensland and endemic to the wet tropics. It is the most vibrant yellow colour you can imagine. But it's this pile of sticks and twigs it's sitting on, it built it. And it can actually go up to 7 foot in height. It's just unbelievable. But the really concerning thing about this species, the golden bowerbird, it lives 2,400 feet above sea level. And and unfortunately, it's suggested that as the climate continues to warm, and theory suggests that this species will continue to push higher in elevation. We don't have very big mountains in northern Australia compared to other parts of the world. The mountains end. And as this species will get pushed higher and higher in elevation, they will run out of habitat. So this is a species, the golden bowerbird, that is truly threatened by potential climate adjustments or change in the future. Possums and gliders, another really interesting group of animals that we love to see in far north Queensland. And the wet tropics, including the Atherton Tablelands, actually has the highest density of possum and glider species anywhere in the world. Approximately 13 different possum and glider species are found here. And there's only 27 found throughout Australia. So we have almost half of Australia's possums found in the wet tropics. And no one could forget the estuarine crocodile, the saltwater crocodile, relatively unchanged for 200 million years, apex predator of tropical coastal habitat. This guy lives in estuaries, hence the name estuarine crocodile. So it's where river systems come in contact with the ocean. They inhabit those areas. And we don't have too many big apex predators in Australia compared to other parts of the world. I mean, I was in America 2 months ago and I saw some bears and I thought they were pretty incredible and terrifying. The fact that you've got apex predators that share the landscape with us. For us, our big apex predator, the estuarine crocodile, lives in the river systems. Now, they're the protector of the mangroves and the reef. So we've got the rainforest, and then we've got strips of mangrove. So these are plants that can live on the edge of the landscape and have their feet or their roots in salt water. The mangroves are a filtration network for the reef system. So as water comes down from the mountains, it goes through our rivers and streams and is filtered by the mangroves before it heads out to the ocean. If we don't have mangroves, we have big landslides and landslips that bring sediment out to the Great Barrier Reef, settles on the coral and kills the coral. Now, the crocodile, he's one of the protectors of the mangrove. By being an apex predator in that environment, any land-based animals that come towards the water's edge looking for food, the crocodile will eat. So he's actually restricting these animals from coming down to the water's edge. And when an animal comes down the water's edge, generally it can cause erosion or kill vegetation. So the crocodile is actually protecting that vegetation by consuming those land-based animals. So he's a fantastic contributor to the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. Now we're going to shift a little bit from animal life to plant life. The Wet Tropics World Heritage Area is the world's oldest rainforest. It's been estimated that the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, the Daintree National Park included, is approximately 180 million years relatively unchanged, stayed as a consistent ecosystem. When you think about it, that's a long time. But when you think about it even harder, they say the Amazon's around 60 million years. So it's possibly 3 times older than the Amazon. And how do we know this? Well, through botanical discoveries. On the left-hand side, I've got a little yellow fruit there. The cassowary's favorite fruit, the Noah's walnut. The middle image, this was a group that we had earlier this year, or late last year rather, and we have this fantastic fig tree in the background, the curtain fig tree, which is a tree that we would visit on the Ultimate Australia. And we've got some Raphiophora, which is a climbing vine-style plant that lives in the Daintree rainforest. Now, I like to talk about the strangler fig because it is probably the most impressive tree we have in far north Queensland. It's the wet tropics is home to several of these different trees. This one is Ficus virens, which is the white fig, and they're scattered throughout the tablelands. And but the most famous one is the curtain fig, which is the tree that we visit. It actually starts life as an epiphyte, which is really unusual. A bird eats the fig, bird flies, bird lands in tree, bird does a poop, and that little seed inside that poop sprouts and turns into an epiphyte, which means it's growing off the host, but it's not parasitic, it doesn't tap into the host. As it's growing as an epiphyte, it starts sending roots down to the ground. So these roots are coming all the way through down the side of the tree, the host tree, into the ground. As the fig hits its roots into the ground, it accesses more moisture, more food, and it grows very quickly. As it grows, the power and the sheer size of the fig is astronomical and actually physically overtakes the host tree and can kill the host tree and replace its position in the rainforest. The curtain fig tree is so unique because the host tree, as it was being overpowered by the fig, actually fell. It fell sideways into some other trees, and more roots came down, creating this beautiful veil like a curtain shape. It is a phenomenal tree. And if you are visiting over here, I look forward to showing you it. Now, the real reason of why the Daintree is so significant is the green dinosaur. This guy, Idiospermum, one of the rarest and most primitive flowering plants on Earth. It was discovered in the early 1900s and then thought to go extinct. Interesting story, the 1970s, which was probably one of the most pinnacle parts which led to the protection of this area. Now, herbologists and botanists had known about this plant and it matched very closely with ancient fossil records. And they realized that this plant, this Idiospermum, was probably the most primitive flowering plant on Earth and gave us a live example of the evolutionary stages of flowering plants of the world. David Attenborough actually calls the wet tropics a living museum, one of the most extraordinary places on Earth. And this plant is one of the reasons. Now, as you can see here, it's rediscovered in the stomach of a cow in the Daintree rainforest during the 1970s. Very, very bizarre. There was cattle farming in the Daintree. There still is in certain areas, unfortunately. The farmer realized that a couple of his cows had died. He thought someone had poisoned them, so he contacted the police. The police contacted a veterinarian who did an examination of the cow's stomach. In that stomach, they found several seeds of this tree, this plant, this Idiospermum, thought to be extinct. To give you an idea about the size of these seeds that are in the picture, they're about the size of your fist. And no animal can actually eat them. They're highly toxic. So it killed the cow. Now, once that had been discovered in the stomach of this cow, scientists started coming from around the world to get over to the Daintree to start finding if this plant was still in existence. And it was. It was living in a place called the Noah Valley. Now, because it's so toxic and it's so big, no animals today could actually consume it. I mean, megafauna probably was consuming and dispersing its seeds, but these days it has no way of dispersing its seeds, does not rely on animals or water. So generally, a fruit would attract an animal to eat it, and then the animal would move the seed to a different location and disperse those seeds. But this guy, he doesn't rely on animals anymore, and it doesn't float, so it doesn't rely on water. It actually just relies on gravity. So the tree would drop a fruit which would land on the ground, and that's where the seed would essentially germinate. Or because it's in a valley, it might roll downhill. So there's one valley in the Daintree rainforest that has the most primitive flowering plant on Earth, the Idiospermum, the green dinosaur. Now, another tree I just wanted to quickly dive into is called the Hope cycad. Very, very slow growing plant and one that, again, is scattered throughout the Daintree rainforest. What's so incredible about this guy? If I'm to anthropomorphize these plants, I give them a little bit of a human emotion. I call this the grandfather, the slow grower, the patient. He sits there and waits, grows 1 inch every 2 to 3 years, and can grow up to 65 foot tall. It's unbelievable. And they only reproduce once every 7 years by utilizing weevils. So there's a male and a female plant. Through heat and chemical communication, they can turn on and off this pollinating cone shaped feature. And by doing that, the weevils will move between the male and the female plant. And that's how it reproduces. It's crazy. Very rarely do plants these days actually use this form of heat and chemical communication and insects to be able to germinate. It's mind blowing. And they've been around for approximately 45 million years unchanged, but their evolutionary history dates back as far as 280 million years. This image I got on the left-hand side is one of our tallest hope cycads we have in the Daintree rainforest. And this is one of our local conservationists who belongs to an organization called Save the Daintree. So the question is the wet tropics under threat? Well, maybe, but maybe not. It's a really, really complex question. As I said earlier, a lot of rainforests in the world are being destroyed. We've lost 50% of the rainforest worldwide, but there is hope in Australia. We have some amazing organisations in Australia: Rainforest Rescue, Save the Daintree, and a random guy named Jimmy with half a beard. These are three big players in far north Queensland, and they've all got the same goal in mind, and that is to buy cleared land that is amongst the rainforest and rehabilitate it back into its former glory. Organisations like Rainforest Rescue, they actually collect cassowary poo that might be on a road. So if a cassowary does a poo on a road, then those seeds are just seen there getting wasted. Their volunteers will collect those seeds, put them into the ground in little pot plants, germinate them, turn them into plants, and they will then sell them to people living in the local area and encourage them to plant cassowary food. With the money they make and from other fundraising opportunities, they will buy land that is for sale around the Daintree and surrounding rainforest. When they buy it, they then start planting these rainforest plants back in. It takes them a couple of generations to be able to get that rainforest back into its former glory. But that's what they're doing. Save the Daintree does the exact same thing: land purchase and protection. The community, the agricultural community of the Daintree is getting smaller and the rainforest is getting bigger. So that leads me to this guy with half a beard. Well, his name is Jimmy, and he calls himself Jimmy Halfcut. He's got half a cut beard. What he does is he travels around Australia and engages with people. People say, "Hey, why have you got half a beard?" He said, "Well, my beard actually represents the world's rainforest. Half of them are cleared." And then he opens up that conversation around rainforest and channels their curiosity into passion and then into protection. He's raised over $500,000 in about 5 years, which then goes into purchasing property and rehabilitating it. One man who's changing far north Queensland. It's incredible. Leads me to my next slide. How else can you protect the rainforest? Well, this is my house. I don't think I've ever shared my house on a webinar before, but well, here you have it. I live in the rainforest. And in 2018, I was living in suburbia in Cairns, just in a normal house in a normal neighborhood, as people would call it. And I went up and explored the Atherton tablelands as I did, and I actually stumbled across a property that was for sale. And I went and examined it, and just by walking up this small little driveway, I heard about 10 different bird species in about 5 minutes. I thought, wow, this is pretty special. I walked along in this rainforest and noticed there was a cleared patch in the middle. It was 2.4 acres of rainforest that is about 100 years old. It was replanted after the logging industry, and it was home to birds, possums, tree kangaroos. And I thought, this is just absolutely incredible. I have to live here. Not only do I need to buy here, I need to live here. I would love to be part of the rainforest. That is where I feel most at home. And also, by owning a rainforest and living there, I can control how that rainforest is treated. Anyone could have purchased this property and cleared it. But for me, this was an opportunity to protect my own piece of rainforest and protect the animals and plants that live there. So now, here I am, living in a tiny home in a rainforest, protecting my little piece. And it sort of leads me into my next slide, which is one of the mottos that I most enjoy. Into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul. And that's what I did. And I encourage everyone to do it. You don't have to get a tiny home and live in a rainforest, but I encourage everyone to step foot into the forest, the Australian rainforest, the South American rainforest, the Asian rainforest, wherever your journeys take you, step into the rainforest and be present. Lose your mind and find your soul. It's an incredible journey. And with that, it's time for our leaf-tailed gecko to hang off a tree and look at me and see if anyone has any questions today from the presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. Now, before we dive into the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel. If you go to the upper right-hand corner and you see those three lines there, go ahead and click on those. That's called the hamburger. Drop on down to where it says questions. If you click in there, you can submit questions there. So let's get to them. So, can you talk about what the differences are between the three kinds of cassowaries?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the northern cassowary, the dwarf cassowary, and the southern cassowary. Very, very similar features. They all belong to the ratite family. They got this dark coloration in plumage, beautiful blues and reds. But the dwarf cassowary is obviously a lot smaller, and the cast on its head is a little bit stumpier as well. The northern cassowary just looks a little bit different. The facial structure, the wattles hanging down from the neck, the cast structure, it just is a little bit different. It's hard to describe, exactly how different they are, but they just look anatomically different. Now, this is obviously through segregation of habitats, and they've evolved that a little bit differently to suit their environment. Resistance creates change, so obviously there's been something in their little microhabitats where these species have lived that's created that change. Uh, Moving forward, I like to do a webinar at least once a month. I am looking at potentially doing one about cassowaries and the ratite family, and also one on tree kangaroos as well. So that might be something to look out for if you're looking for a more detailed explanation to the differences of the three species.
Thank you. Just how old are cassowaries, and are they descendants of dinosaurs, maybe?
Yeah, it's hard to say whether it's a descendant of dinosaur. It's essentially a different branch. Their ancestors, no doubt, would have been through those different Jurassic periods. But you're looking at 60 million years of uh, evolutionary history. In other words, over the last 60 million years, they haven't really changed too much. They have branched separately from, obviously, the mass extinction events of the dinosaurs that we've seen. Um, but an individual can actually live to be 60 years old as well. And again, I'm not going to dive too heavily into the topic, but they're such a primitive animal. Very long, strong, powerful legs, very big feet, three toes, like your typical dinosaur-looking footprint, and three massive big claws. I did allude to the fact that the cassowary is the most dangerous bird. Now, this is not based on statistics by any means, it's through potential. When a cassowary feels threatened, they get a run up and they jump and they kick. And with that front claw, they can actually stab. Now, if we have a look at history of how many people have actually died from a cassowary, there's only been two. One of them was in the 1950s in far north Queensland. And this was a teenage boy that thought it was a good idea to attack a cassowary with a stick. Obviously, the cassowary retaliated and caused a fatal injury. And the other one was actually in 2019 in Florida, which is quite unusual. But a man in Florida actually had a cassowary as a pet. It was not native to America by any means, but essentially the pet owner relationship must have broken down. An altercation occurred where the cassowary caused a fatal injury to his owner. So yeah, 2019 was our second recorded cassowary fatality. Now, the key word is, of course, recorded. No doubt there's been other situations where people have been killed over time, but there's no other records kept.
Are they a hard bird to see when we're out there in Daintree?
Yes, absolutely. They're incredibly elusive to see. Um, it's certainly far from a guarantee, but your local guides and expedition leaders know the best places to explore, and we make sure that we spend the most time we can in these areas. Now, remember, they're not only found in the Daintree, they're found in the Atherton Tablelands as well. I have run multiple different Ultimate Australia tours, and we've been fortunate enough to see a cassowary every time. But we do put the time and effort in. We focus on those areas where they are found. So they're found in the higher altitude rainforests of the tablelands and in the low altitude rainforests of the Daintree. In fact, we did have an Ultimate Australia tour earlier this year where a cassowary actually walked through our accommodation in the Atherton Tablelands. So some guests woke up to a cassowary walking past their room. So yes, they can be hard to find, but sometimes they may present themselves quite easily. For a bird that's so big, they can disappear into the rainforest very, very quickly. But it's far from a guarantee. They are incredibly elusive, very, very hard to find.
And just how tall are they? Are they taller than an ostrich, for instance?
Yeah, so they're actually 6 foot tall, and that's a female, a big female, so shorter than an ostrich. They're a bit more robust, but when the cassowary's walking along, it's quite hunched over. And what it does is, if it feels threatened or if it's trying to grab fruit from a tree, it will stick its head straight up and stand upright. And that's when it can get up to 6 foot. The female is bigger than the male, though. Generally, this is a rat height thing, whereas the females are more dominant than the male. To give you a bit of an idea, through the breeding season, the female will mate with a male. He will prepare a nest, and it's a nest is probably an exaggeration. It's just a platform with a couple of sticks. The female will lay eggs, big green eggs. The male will incubate them. She runs off and then most likely will reproduce with another male. So she's all about genetic diversity, and he's all about looking after the kids. So yes, male probably around about 5 foot, female up to 6 foot.
Great. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. Very interesting bird. Um, so, um, so this picture of the gecko that we're seeing, is this your photo? How did you get this one? Amazing.
Yeah, so this is one of my photos. It's actually called a northern leaf-tailed gecko. Now, when people come to far north Queensland on the Ultimate Australia experience, we do a nighttime activity. So we go for a walk in the rainforest at nighttime. We don't go trudging through the wilderness. We stick to paths and quiet streets, but we actually look for this animal. And we do find it fairly frequently, but it's the master of camouflage. So this particular one was laying flat on a tree, looking down the tree. So they sit on the side of a tree and their scales look just like lichen. So they can blend in with the trunk of a tree. Now, I really wanted to capture one during the day, and this is what I did because they are nocturnal. And During the night, you can spot them because they push themselves away from the tree. They stand up a little bit. They produce an eye shine when you're looking with a torch, and sometimes they're moving around during the nighttime. During the day, they lay flat against the tree, don't move a centimeter or an inch, and they're very, very hard to spot. So I actually photographed this guy at my house in the rainforest. And the way I did it was I spotted him at night time and I kept my eye on him, see where he went, see where he moved, and I waited till the sun came up. Then I actually climbed a ladder, and luckily my wife wasn't there because it was a little bit precarious. But I climbed a ladder with a tripod with my camera, leant it all up against it, laid my camera against the trunk, focused on the eyes, and managed to take the shot. But yes, a photo that I'm very, very happy with. It took a lot of effort, but it really shows how these animals can blend in with their surrounds so easily.
Great. Thank you so much. So we hear there are some really interesting and famous bats in the area. Can you talk about the bats that
Mm.
are in Daintree?
Yes, certainly. So not necessarily again the Daintree, the tablelands as well. In fact, we do have one of the biggest roosts of spectacled flying foxes in the Atherton Tablelands. We also have an area which we visit on the NatHab Ultimate Australia Tour called the Tolga Bat Hospital. Now, to give you a bit of an idea about this species, it's what we call a megabat. So it's a big bat. It's not a very, very small bat. We have micro bats and megabats. This is a megabat. So you're probably looking at from feet to head, maybe about a foot long. And this is a flying mammal, and and they're a big fruit eater and a big seed distributor. So during the day, they'll sit in a camp hanging from a tree. I call it a camp or a roost. It's just a big congregation of them during the day because they are nocturnal. During the day, they squawk, they fly around a little bit, communicating with each other, caring for their babies. At night time, as soon as that sun's gone down, they take flight in mass numbers, thousands of them at a time. They move throughout the rainforest to different areas. They feed on fruit, and as they're flying, they're either spitting out the seed through their mouth or they're digesting it and pooing it out as they go. So, again, they're one of the most important seed distributors in far north Queensland, and a species that we will absolutely see on our Northern Australia trip. And we're able to meet with some conservationists that are doing work to help this species in the field. The spectacled flying fox, unfortunately, they are susceptible to paralysis tick. And without diving too heavily into the topic, the introduction of a wild tobacco in Australia. So this is not, harvested or agricultural tobacco. This is wild. The fruit of the tobacco is very, very appealing to bats, and it's a very, very low tree. It's a low shrub that generally lives amongst grasses. So, with this beautiful fruit, it entices the bats to come down really low to the tobacco tree and get exposed to grasses. Now, bats don't usually come in contact with grass, so they don't have this evolutionary history which has built up a resistance to paralysis ticks. Whereas a lot of other animals that live around grass are resistant to it through evolutionary techniques. But because the spectacled flying fox does not generally access grass, they're not immune to it. When they come down to the tobacco, they eat the fruit, sometimes get exposed to a tick. They'll then fly back to their roost, their camp. During the early morning, they might succumb to paralysis, fall out of the tree, paralyzed, and die. This is where the local bat hospital comes into play. They're all about early intervention, trying to save these animals if possible, and if they've got a young, obviously raising that young and rehabilitating it for a release. They do a fantastic amount of work around that species, but there's many other threats to them, including barbed wire, habitat destruction, and also heat wave events. We lost one third of our spectacle flying fox population Australia wide. They are found in far north Queensland, but Australia wide, we lost one third of the entire species in 1 week in 2019. A heat wave event essentially caused them to overheat. They couldn't cool down quick enough, and they started falling from the trees and dying. For an animal that's critically important to the health of the rainforest with seed distribution, this was a huge loss to the region. And we're hoping with the great work of our conservationists, we can build that population up again.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So one of our guests is really curious about how, while living in your tiny home, you can minimize impact on the rainforest.
Mm. Well, here's the first thing. I use a water tank, and I use compost toilets, and we don't use any form of chemical that could impact the environment around us. We do have underground power. I don't get sunlight directly to my home. If it's a sunny day, I might get 3 to 4 hours, so I'm unable to use solar energy, so I do use electricity. But behind my house is rainforest that goes for, I would say, it's a whole acre behind my house that is completely untouched. We don't go anywhere near it. It's just what we would say is conservation property. We have no impact, whereas we don't walk through it, we don't do anything. We're constantly controlling weeds. You might notice a couple of plants here around the house. Some of them are native, some are not. Most are. But also everything that grows in that rainforest is native, and we obviously protect it by removing any feral pests as well. Another animal that we have in this area is called a cane toad. This is a very highly poisonous toad, very destructive to the environment. We're constantly removing them from the environment and getting rid of them. And we also have put in a few different ponds that's out of this image, where we're encouraging a lot of frog life to come back in, and obviously giving the birds a place where they can come and bathe and drink. So yeah, we're trying to obviously protect it, but avoid any introduced pests coming in and impacting it. The biggest problem about this is the area that I live is a critical habitat for tree kangaroos, and anyone could buy this, and there's nothing stopping them from clearing the rainforest. So the area that was cleared in the middle is the only area that we have cleared. We don't cut down any trees, and obviously we do our best to mitigate any pest species.
So are you seeing any impact of climate change in your piece of the rainforest?
I mean, I've been living in my piece of the rainforest for probably 3 years now. Certainly not a long-term data that I could collect to see a climate change. And I guess I'm not a scientist, and I don't do any work in the climate adjustment world. And just in 3 years, it's hard to get any long-term data or even just casual observations. I'd probably have to live a very long lifestyle to be able to see those changes. But in saying that, in other areas, other rainforests of Australia, I've certainly seen changes by talking to locals, speaking with conservationists, and seeing events that don't occur. And generally, I'm talking about Tasmania. There has been bushfires of areas where trees have been killed. The bushfires have never ever occurred before. Trees that are 2,000 years old have been killed by bushfires that have never ever occurred before. So we are seeing adjustments throughout Australia from climate, but nothing that I have observed directly in the last couple of years at home.
So how common is it for people to buy rainforest property like you've done?
It's very uncommon, actually. Um, The area that I live is a corridor rainforest, so it connects two different habitats. And when it's a corridor, it's very thin. There's actually a creek on the other side of the road. So this is an area where animals are concentrated to move from one big forest to another, and they move through our property. So that's why we make sure there's no fences around, because this can obviously disrupt it. Other people in my street are fairly like-minded. One of my neighbors was actually a board member for UNESCO, so he determined what was and wasn't a World Heritage Area for a long time. We have nature photographers as well, but generally people that buy a rainforest property are looking for that alternative lifestyle or a way in which they can protect it. But we don't encourage everyone to live in a rainforest. It's not really for everyone. But what we do is encourage people to make small decisions that can lead to bigger change. And that can be all about composting, can be all about planting native species, and obviously controlling pest species as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt. Unfortunately, that is going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'm going to throw it back to you for your closing comments.
Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed today's podcast webinar. I keep calling it a podcast, but as you can see, for me, team, a rainforest means the world to me. Uh, my place. This is my place. This is my everything, my life. When I'm not away working, I sit there and I simply just look at the trees. And I truly believe in this motto. I find it is one of the most impactful and relevant mottos to my life. So all I encourage you to do is, if you're coming to Australia on the next season, on the Ultimate Australia trip, or you're exploring another part of the world, it doesn't even have to be a rainforest. Please immerse yourself, separate all of your other thoughts and distractions, lose your mind, and find your soul. That's what the natural world is all about.
Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to present this topic to us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. So, if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We will see you next time.